Counter-Strike Global Offensive has had many a main character, but few have the charisma and gravity of Cadian. A man who has fought through trials and tribulations, battled back from near retirement to the top of the game, he leads one of the best teams in the world both emotionally and tactically, and he's had many a big moment himself. Unfortunately though, if he is the protagonist, that would make Counter-Strike Global Offensive a tragedy. A dramatic one, but a tragedy nonetheless. That he has fought through so much set him up for the greatest comeback story of all time. That he would have completed the arc, a traditional Greek comedy. He could have been comedian after all. Alas, it did not end with the perfect ending. Instead, it ended with tragedy. Our hero, head down, the victim of sorrowful events. So close, and yet, so far. Like all great players, this one began with a downturn. Cadian was always the odd one out, the black sheep, the ugly duckling for want of a better phrase, in Denmark. He was there at the start of CSGO, but a pretty disappointing stint on Mouse before jumping around Denmark trying to find a safe home. He landed on Copenhagen Wolves, but rarely put up great performances, and then SK where he was mediocre. We don't mean to rag on him, but it's important to set up how not Cadian he was back in 2014. He was the butt of many a joke too, especially after losing a 1v1 to Giuliano, which, in retrospect, it isn't a great look for anyone involved. Cadian's reputation wasn't exactly sparkling, and he's spoken in the past about coming close to retirement a few times. Fortunately though, he decided to stick it out and found himself on Rogue. Danish one. It went a lot better. He wasn't on the big boys, but he was fragging again, consistently. People didn't notice all that much for a while because it wasn't on Astralis and people don't like admitting they were wrong. Shortly, of course, they'd have no choice. Rogue's project didn't go all that well, but they did like Cadian. When the Danish idea collapsed, Cadian was kept on to lead an American project. Which, honestly, even now in retrospect, sounds like a terrible idea. It's not that these players are bad, but they're quite clearly a way away from Cadian, which is easy to see in retrospect, but it wasn't necessarily at the time. Cadian led this team, much like he did Heroic, to heights unforeseen. It really came to a head when they qualified for the FACEIT Major, and they faced off against perennial underachievers North. Here came the second of Cadian's tragic falls. A ridiculous map of Counter-Strike ended, as it so often does, in heartbreak. 5 match points squandered. North survive, Rogue, heroic in failure, but failure nonetheless. North clearly saw what Cadian brought to a team though. They too were underachievers who needed to kick up the proverbial arse, even if their current in-game leader had just warped his way to an MVP at Stockholm one tournament prior. 2018 was a weird time. Things didn't exactly go to plan at North. They started well at ECS, but a depressing 0-2 loss to Vici saw them out of the major, and after that Cadian's position seemed untenable. That seemed like his big shot, but the North gig always seemed like a poison chalice. Trust me, I say that with love, but fuck me, poison chalice. His third big fall, but this one set him up for his biggest success. He joined Heroic not long after, and the rest is, well, modern history. It wasn't all unicorns and roses. After an impressive rise, Heroic were meant to move to FunPlus Phoenix for a whole bunch of money, which fell through at the last minute and left them kinda screwed. We're sure that had no financial repercussions on the future. While many rued the loss of Lance, Heroic saw it as an opportunity, a chance to grow, improve and grind away from the limelight. And Cadian was reborn as a superstar. The superstar it always felt like he could have been in an alternate dimension. Perhaps there's some sort of COVID-induced crossover into said other dimension. Heroic slowly but surely became the best team in the world, or at least one of them, but for the sake of this video, Heroic were the best team in the world. Between Gambit, Big and Vitality they had several competitors, but Heroic were constantly around the top and won some big tournaments. You might, for example, remember Pro League.
Yeah. Oh my god, he's knifed him and he's gotten away with the AWP. I'm starting to get nervous. There's no way, Cadian, you can't win Pro League like this! You can't win Pro League like this! No way! He's thinking about round. Jumping.
Saw him.
Gets the info, he just has to hit this shot and he's done it for Heroic. The leader, calling well above his years, clearing corners. Oh no! You're an animal! Heroic have done it and I just can't believe it!
And then Lance came back and Heroic were still really good, just not that good yet. Cadian was the same emotional leader, maybe more loud and energetic than even before, if you can believe that, and the same player. He's not a super dominant AWPer, but a player who steps up in the big moments and has that protagonist energy. He does the important shooty bits, but not as many of the small shooty bits as someone like ZywOo or Simple. And that led Heroic to playoffs constantly, but not the big trophies. 3rd to 4th at Stockholm was impressive, but Cadian needed that major to really seal the deal. He turned his entire career around. Every bad thing that happened, every trial, every test, he'd come through the other side. Life had thrown tragedy at him and he'd came out fucking swinging. Heroic had come too far to fail, and so it required a rejig. Sjuush and Refresh came in for Borup and NiKo in what was seen as a huge risk at the time, but now seems obvious. They also swapped coach at some point, but we'd rather not talk about that. Exist has been great for them though. Their system was unique in the world of Counter-Strike, the constant yet controlled aggression, the information gathering without using too much util, the constricting, suffocating style. Sjuush proved an inspired pickup, a guy who hasn't made a wrong decision in probably 3 years. Refresh was very good, but Heroic had to be as ruthless outside the server as they were in it, and they swapped him for the rising Yabi. There were teething problems. Maybe this was the move too far, maybe this was the tragedy that stops Cadian. Cologne was a disaster and Pro League wasn't dominant either. Still, the Major and Rio beckoned. And as every big team failed, FaZe, Na'Vi, Vitality all fell early. It felt that fate had smiled upon our hero. Cadian, finally, was getting on Lady Luck's good side. This was Heroic's time. They walked out in front of the Brazilian crowd against Outsiders. If this was a film, there's not a chance on earth Outsiders would win. They were the quiet ones. You know how when you watch a talent show and they focus on one guy and not the other during auditions, so that when there's a decision you know which one Simon Cowell is going to choose? This was like that, except Heroic lost.
Prepare to start new celebrations! Finally! Outsiders! 6 years dust and
This was the 4th tragedy. Fate held up its side of the bargain, but for once Cadian and his boys could not hold up theirs. He'd come too far to fail, and yet Cadian had one more shot. One more shot at absolution, at redemption, at completing the perfect story. Heroic won the Blast Premier Fall Final and showed that indeed they weren't just final chokers, they could do it. They could do it! Katowice beckoned and Heroic once again were the best team in the tournament except one. In their defence, nobody was beating G2 at that event. Heroic were the only team to even take a map off of them. That's fine. Nobody would blame them for losing that final. Just before the Major 2, they had a shot at mini redemption at Rio. Once more, they were superb for the whole tournament. Truly, one of the best teams in their own style, likely ever. Except in Grand Finals. They pushed Vitality close on both maps, but lost both. Who cares? It's not the Major. That's the one Heroic really need. The one Cadian really needs. Really, really needs. The final Major called his name, even if the arena booed it. Heroic breezed through qualifications, swept through the Legend stage, and were handed a toughie against FaZe to kick off the playoffs. No stress, you have to beat some great teams to win a Major. And beat them they did. Cadian, excellent, Stavn, dominant. Vitality won on their side of the bracket, guided by fate to the perfect final. ZywOo versus Cadian awaited us in front of the French crowd. Gaming Legion had been superb, but they weren't powered by destiny. They were running off adrenaline and momentum, not fate. The 5th tragedy. Gaming Legion were genuinely brilliant, and once more many were blinded by the story of Cadian. We wanted to believe that life is fair, that fairy tales always have happy endings, and that Counter-Strike is beautiful. We wanted to believe in the perfect story, but all that was proven is that if this is a story, it's a tragedy. The tragedy of Cadian.